Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Kane's independent media production. Today, the big question. We all know you need to tune your drums, but do the drums need to be in tune? These drums you just heard are not in tune with themselves. These drums are intentionally not in tune, but they sound good. They sound like drums. They sound in the ballpark of how these drums always sound. So now the question becomes, what is in tune as it relates to the drums sounding good? Let's jump right in. First, we're going to do our normal demos of each of the drums, and then we're going to show you exactly how out of tune they are. Now, obviously, we are trying to tune our drums to sound good. However, and we come back to this pretty often, a good sounding drum is not immediately telling us that it is in tune with itself or that it's tuned any particular way. If we like the sound of it, it's a good sounding drum. But what goes into that is not necessarily meticulously getting every single lug to the exact same tension and pitch to within a couple of cents. There's a lot more to it than that. If the portion of the demonstration where we went around each of the lugs to display the out-of-tuneness of the drum was tricky for you to hear, if it was challenging, then the good news is it doesn't really matter, because if you're happy with the sound of the drum, that's really what we're here for. And for us, oftentimes we like to start with the drum being in tune with itself so that we have this clean slate to deviate from, but that doesn't mean that a perfectly in tune with itself drum is going to sound good at all, or that it's going to sound better than one that is slightly out of tune with itself. We've actually demonstrated some tips and tricks and hacks in the past that specifically include detuning part of one of the drums, for instance, when we're trying to eliminate crosstalk. This necessarily implies that the thing is not in tune with itself anymore, but that's the solution and it still sounds great. So now we're moving away from the idea that the ear training we need is about each lug being the same, and toward the idea that we want the drum to sound good at any cost. By the way, if you have enjoyed what we do here, if you've gotten any mileage out of these demonstrations, or maybe saved a couple of bucks, or found a piece of gear that was right for you, please consider following the link below and going to the Patreon. It's the best way to ensure that we can continue to support and grow this community, share the information that we have, and continue to make this show. The fundamental point here is that we want the drum to sound good in the end, and that means hitting the drum in the middle and listening to the sound of that. If we get too bogged down in the minutia of each lug being exactly the same and fail to recognize that our end goal is not to have all the lugs the same, but to have the drum sound great, then we're going to fuss a lot more than necessary and maybe miss out on a great sound along the way. I've mentioned this in the past, but I want to bring focus to this as well. When I'm gigging and I set my drums up on a stage, I don't tune them every time. What I do is I set them up and I hit them, and if I'm happy, I leave them alone, and if I'm hearing a problem, I will adjust and try to eliminate that problem. That doesn't mean that I'm ignoring whether or not they're sounding good. I'm just ignoring whether or not I need to put that extra time in. Now, on the other hand, there have been plenty of times where there was an issue with the sound on stage that was really palpable, the floor tom feeding back from the subs or some weird thing like that that I wasn't prepared for, and the drum itself was perfectly in tune and sounded totally good. Or it was perfectly in tune and didn't sound that great, and making it a little out of tune gave me the sound that I was after. So let's step over the idea that we need to focus on this minutia, which frankly we do focus on here for demonstration purposes and for teaching purposes, and get back into the mindset of music, musical sounds, beautiful sounds from the drums, and having fun again. Where understanding the minutia of the tuning itself does come into play, especially for me and also for a lot of people that we see talking in the comments, is a matter of being able to either recreate a sound that made you happy or have a really good starting point that you can then deviate from if you want to make adjustments. So time spent on the lugs, time spent on balancing everything is time well spent. However, if you find yourself getting caught up in that and start to care more about that than whether or not the drum is giving you the sound that you're looking for, take a breath, take a step back, and remember that we're not hitting all 6 of the lugs in rehearsal or at a gig or in a recording. We're hitting the drum in the middle, hopefully with some consistency, and trying to have a sound there that makes us happy. The amount of time that Ben and I have both spent fussing with individual tension rods and trying to get certain sounds, above all else, gives us the capacity to make micro adjustments and maybe sometimes larger adjustments without fear of losing what we already had or not being able to get back there if it was doing okay. So do spend that time just for the sake of the functional capacity there, but don't let that become the end game. We also made a couple of choices today to really bring to light this phenomena of drums being out of tune and still working. And the specific choice that we made was to use single ply heads on everything. Generally speaking, single ply heads are going to be less forgiving than a 2-ply head, not necessarily because of the mass, but because of the way that the 2 plies work in conjunction with each other to generate the sound. For what it's worth, when I play live with my kit, the toms do get 2-ply heads, both for durability and frankly, I just feel like I have to fuss with them less often, so it's a twofer for me. This also means that if you want to get into experimenting and really looking at each of the tension rods and how they're balancing out to the head, using single ply heads for that is going to give you a lot more auditory information. So if you're a 2-ply or a hydraulic person, or you have preferences in a thicker head direction, it's worth spending some time with single plies, if only to just get some ear training around the overtones. This doesn't mean that you need to go out and buy new heads. Actually, the bottoms of your drums probably have single ply heads on there, unless you swapped them out for 2-plies at some point. So flip the toms over, get to work on the ears. It bears repeating, so we're going to repeat it. This is not a public service message that says you don't have to tune your drums or that detuned drums are going to sound great all the time. That's not that at all. What we're saying here today is that if you're getting stuck in the minutia and losing track of the sound of the drums in performance, we want to spend as little time as possible fussing with the sound. We want to be playing. So never forget that a little goes a long way with these things, and we want to make sure that we have enough ear training to, at the very least, identify if we like the way that the drum is sounding, and if we don't, be able to adjust toward that. We don't normally hand out homework here, it sounds like a drum, but today we want to offer a little bit of a challenge for anybody watching here, and that is to either get your drum super in tune with itself if you're comfortable doing that, and then experiment with detuning it and see where it takes you. Alternatively, try starting out from scratch, and rather than getting the drum in tune with itself first, just hit it in the center and turn things and see what happens, because there are sounds along the way that might be super useful. And while you're at it, please like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to get all of our notifications for new videos. And again, please follow the link below to the Patreon. It is the best way to help us continue to do this. We really appreciate all of the support. And if you've had good experiences with detuned drums, we would love to hear about them.